My name is Abigail, and for most of my adult life, my family has called me the ghost of Pacific Heights. To them, I am a cautionary tale, a 34-year-old spinster who spends her days in a damp Mission District workshop, smelling of industrial oil and oxidizing brass. While my sister Madison posts photos of her glamorous art gallery life from rooftop bars, I am usually bent over a loop, aligning escapement wheels on an 18th century marine chronometer. They think I scrape by on pennies. They think I'm tragic. What they don't know is that the dusty gears they mock have built me a fortune of over $27 million. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family while someone else got all the praise? Let me know your story down in the comments. I'd love to see who belongs to our Quiet Achievers Club. The dining room of my parents' Pacific Heights estate always smelled of silver polish and old money that was secretly running out. On Thanksgiving, the heating system was struggling against the damp San Francisco fog, leaving a chill in the air that no amount of expensive candles could chase away. My parents, Christopher and Amanda, were old school socialites. To them, net worth was something you wore on your wrist, not something you actually banked. They valued the performance of success over the structural reality of it. Madison arrived 45 minutes late, breezing in with a flurry of shopping bags and manic energy. She was wrapped in premium designer layers that I knew she couldn't afford, dumping her things onto the vintage sideboard like she owned the place. Behind her, Tyler trailed like a shadow. He looked gray, his posture tight, his eyes darting to his phone every 30 seconds. He wasn't acting like a wealthy hedge fund manager. He was acting like a man waiting for an execution. Sorry we're late, Madison announced, pouring herself a glass of wine before anyone else had even sat down. Traffic near the marina was absolute torture, but I simply had to pick up this vintage bottle. It's an unreleased import from an exclusive estate. My mother, Amanda, clasped her hands together in pure adoration. Oh, Madison, you always have the most exquisite taste. Doesn't she, Abigail? I looked up from the silver bread basket. It looks fine, I said, my voice completely flat. Madison scoffed immediately. Fine? Abigail, fine is a word for a sweater from a department store grid. This is culture. The rest of the dinner devolved into a transactional monologue of Madison's superficial milestones, the art gallery showcases she managed, the wealthy tech influencers she charmed, the luxury real estate she browsed. I ate in absolute silence, my gray rock defense fully activated. I spent the time auditing the table. I watched Tyler. He wasn't eating his turkey. His fork was shaking, clicking against the porcelain plate like a miniature seismic tremor. His leg was vibrating under the table so violently it was rattling the heavy silverware. The facade was fracturing right in front of them, but my parents were completely blind to it. Then Madison pivoted her weaponized attention toward me. So, Abby, she said, leaning forward with a look of practiced pity. Mom says you're still driving that ancient 12-year-old Subaru. Is that thing even structurally safe? I mean, I know money is tight in the antique trade, but it's honestly embarrassing when you park that absolute eyesore in front of the house. My mother nodded gently, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. We truly worry about your safety, dear. If you need a small loan for a down payment on a standard compact car, just ask. Your father and I can probably scrape something together from our discretionary accounts. I'm fine, I repeated, my tone clinical. I like my car. Madison rolled her eyes, deeply bored by my lack of an emotional defense. You have this concept, a martyr complex, Abby, she corrected, shaking her head. You think there's some spiritual virtue in struggling. There isn't. It's just tragic. I didn't correct her. I let her enjoy her illusion of superiority. My silence wasn't weakness. It was accounting. Ugh, my battery's completely dead, Madison snapped, tossing her phone onto the table in frustration. Without asking, she reached across the table and snatched my aluminum laptop. I'm just going to use your machine to log into my gallery cloud. Honestly, Abby, why do you even own a pro-tier setup if you just use it to look up old clock gears? She swiped the trackpad, and the screen woke up instantly. But it wasn't displaying a web browser or a restoration manual. I had been conducting my quarterly financial review on the bus over, and the master dashboard of my asset management account was completely live. Madison's voice died in her throat. The smug smirk on her face evaporated, replaced by a pale, twitching confusion. She pulled the screen closer to her face, her eyes rapidly scanning the balances. What kind of simulation game is this? she mumbled, her fingers shaking against the aluminum casing. $27,450,811.30. With a 14% annual growth metric, the entire room froze. My father let out a dry, dismissive laugh. Don't be ridiculous, Madison. Abigail doesn't have $27 to her name, let alone millions. It's a glitch. My mother grabbed the laptop out of Madison's hands, her polished nails scratching the metal. As she scrolled through the verified real estate deeds and index fund holdings, she looked up at me with an expression that wasn't pity, it was raw terror. Abigail, she whispered, her voice trembling, are you laundering money for criminals? Are you in federal trouble? I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice to validate my life to the people who spent decades treating me like an invisible failure. I simply reached across the table, took my laptop back, and closed the lid with a heavy, definitive click. I pulled out my phone, opened my network security app, and instantly severed the shared family data plan and the emergency access links I had maintained out of childhood obligation. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. This wasn't an emotional breakdown, it was a balance sheet. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, allowing my compassion to be a luxury they overdrafted. Now I realized it had been a toxic subscription, and I was footing the bill. This is the reality of what psychological experts call the invisible chains of a survivor. When you grow up as the designated black sheep in a status-obsessed household, your survival mechanism modifies how you handle reality. You learn that any sign of success will be targeted for harvesting or destruction. My choice to remain invisible, driving an old car, and wearing thrifted clothes wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sophisticated psychological defense perimeter, a dynamic gray rock shield to protect my world from their parasitic extraction. The emotional cage they built to keep me small had actually become my fortress, a quiet laboratory where I was busy engineering an empire of absolute financial freedom. The silence at the table didn't last. It mutated instantly into a predatory, calculating hunger. Madison's voice pitched higher, stripping away any remaining pretense of sisterly affection. You have $27 million sitting in your portfolio, and you let mom pay for your transit. You let dad buy you dinner last month. You are a fraud, Abigail. I never asked him to buy me dinner, Madison, I said, my posture perfectly rigid. He insisted because he wanted to feel benevolent. I just didn't disrupt his script. Suddenly, Tyler collapsed forward, slamming his palms onto the mahogany table. His hands were shaking violently, his tech investor confidence completely shattered. Abby, please, he choked out, looking at me with bloodshot, desperate eyes. We are in an absolute catastrophe. The venture fund. It's not just a liquidity crunch. The clearinghouse issued an emergency margin call last week. If I don't infuse $6,800,000 into our clearing account by Monday at 9 in the morning, they will liquidate our positions and trigger an automatic federal compliance audit. It's a Ponzi scheme, Abby. Once the SEC looks at the books, it's wire fraud. I'm going to prison. Madison loses the condo. We lose everything. Madison lunged across the table, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve. You hear him? You're hoarding millions in index funds while your own sister is about to be destroyed. You can fix this with a single wire transfer tonight. It's an investment, Abby. We'll give you equity. No, I said. A single clean syllable that sliced through her hysteria. My father stood up from his chair, trying to project the imposing weight of his past legal career. His face was mottled with a deep, furious crimson. What do you mean, no? Abigail, look at this, realistically. You earned this capital while utilizing the structural safety net and the societal reputation this family provided. I funded your undergraduate semesters. We provided a baseline of support when you were 22. This money doesn't belong exclusively to your private ledger. It is a direct product of the family's legacy, and your sister's financial survival is non-negotiable. You will sign the authorization form tonight. I looked at him, completely unmoved by the theater of his authority. You were an elite corporate attorney for 30 years, Dad. You know exactly how legally bankrupt that argument is. My assets are locked inside a private holding company. There is no family pot. There is only your desperation masking itself as a legal right. I am not funding a bailout for wire fraud. I stood up, picked up my laptop, and walked out of the dining room. I moved past the grand hallway and the framed shrines to their golden child, stepping out into the cold San Francisco night. The damp fog rolled over my face, tasting clean and crisp. Behind me, Madison screamed my name into the empty street, but I didn't turn around. I got into my Subaru, pulled out into the misty dark, and dialed my asset protection team. It was nearly midnight, but my wealth counsel answered on the first ring. By the time I reached the highway, an absolute legal firewall was being built around my entire corporate structure. The text message from my father arrived at exactly 1:50. It read, "You owe your entire existence to this family, Abigail. Without my financial backing in your youth, you would be nothing. Your selfishness is a criminal insult to my legacy." I stared at the glowing screen, completely unmoved by the frantic hostility. There was no sadness, no panic, and no regret. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of familial guilt, but there was only absolute clarity. This wasn't a family breakdown. It was an audit, and my father's moral ledger was completely bankrupt. He truly believed his own narrative, utterly trapped inside a behavioral phenomenon known as the trap of cruel normalization. In a toxic family dynamic, the narcissist must normalize the worthlessness of the scapegoat to protect their fragile ego. By casting you as the defective black sheep, their brains become structurally incapable of registering your talent. My parents didn't just overlook my professional growth over the last 12 years. Their deep bias made them completely blind to the value right in front of their faces. They genuinely categorized my expertise as a tragic little hobby, completely unaware that their own blindness was setting the stage for their financial execution. Let me map out the history of my $27 million a sequence my father's arrogant mind could never comprehend. During the spring cleaning of 2014, my father cleared out his grandfather's estate. He uncovered a tarnished, water-damaged wooden box filled with old brass gears, oxidized weights, and calcified springs. He took it to a cheap gold shop, hoping to scrap the metal for $50. The pawnbroker laughed and called it worthless junk. Insulted and furious, my father returned, threw the box at my feet, and ordered me to haul his grandfather's legacy to the dump because it was useless. I didn't take it to the dump. I brought it straight to my workbench. Beneath 2 centuries of calcified grease and negligent rust, I discovered the unmistakable maker's mark of a master horologist. It was an incredibly rare, experimental 18th century marine chronometer designed to calculate longitude at sea, one of only 3 ever produced by a student of John Harrison. I spent 4 grueling months performing delicate microsurgery on those discarded brass wheels, restoring the balance mechanism without altering the historic patina. 6 months later, I quietly sold that piece of dumpster garbage to a private European maritime foundation for exactly $195,000. That money wasn't just cash, it was my baseline seed money. I used it as a down payment to secure a commercial mortgage on the foreclosed warehouse my workshop was inside of. As San Francisco real estate skyrocketed, I executed strategic cash-out refinances, leveraging that equity to build a massive commercial property portfolio and index fund empire. My father didn't fund my life or support my career. He literally threw my entire fortune into the trash because his elitist arrogance made him blind to its true substance. I didn't steal from his legacy. I simply rescued his discarded treasure from the bin and used it to buy the world while he was busy drowning in debt. 6 months passed like the steady, unyielding ticking of a master-crafted pendulum. The corporate and legal firewalls I had established remained entirely unbroken. And then, exactly as the mathematical metrics predicted, the facade of Pacific Heights suffered a total, catastrophic liquidation. The news broke in the financial section of the Chronicle. Tyler's venture fund was exposed as a massive, multi-layered Ponzi scheme. The federal indictments were swift. Their liquid assets were instantly frozen, the leased luxury vehicles were repossessed from the driveway in broad daylight, and the historic family mansion was forced into an immediate bankruptcy auction. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in mid-May, the heavy iron bell above my workshop door chimed. I didn't look up from my workbench. I was currently installing a delicate ruby palette stone into the escapement mechanism of a 1790 pocket watch, a task requiring a completely steady hand and absolute emotional stillness. Through the reflection in my magnifying lamp, I saw my mother, Amanda. She was soaked from the rain, her expensive designer coat stained at the hem, her hair matted against her face. The look of elite superiority she had worn for 34 years was entirely gone, replaced by a raw, hollowed-out desperation. "Abigail, please," she whispered, her voice cracking against the quiet hum of my workshop's dehumidifiers. "You have to help us. Tyler is facing 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Madison is staying in a cheap motel. Her credit cards are completely canceled. The bank finalized the foreclosure auction weeks ago, and the new owner just served us an absolute eviction notice for next week. We have nowhere to go, Abby. You have $27 million. A single signature from you could buy back our lives." I carefully placed my tweezers down. I removed my horology loop from my eye and finally looked directly at the woman who had spent my entire childhood treating me like an unwanted ghost. "I know all about the foreclosure, Mom," I said, my voice completely steady, matching the precise rhythm of the clocks ticking on the wall behind me. Amanda clasped her hands together, tears of intense relief spilling over her wrinkled cheeks. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Abigail. I knew that underneath that cold exterior, you still loved this family. When can we move back in?" "You don't understand," I said, my eyes completely ice cold. "I didn't buy the house to save your performance, Mom. When Tyler's fund first fractured months ago, my commercial real estate holding company quietly bought your distressed mortgage note directly from the lender. I orchestrated the foreclosure myself. It's currently being cleared out to be leased to an international tech incubator complex. The eviction notice you received for next Tuesday, that was signed by my legal counsel. I am not funding a lifestyle that was engineered to make me feel small. Goodbye, Mom." Before she could process the absolute finality of my words, I stepped back, picked up my loop, and turned back to my workbench. The heavy oak door of my shop clicked shut behind her, locking out her screams and leaving me in absolute beautiful silence. The weeks following the total collapse of my biological family were defined by a silence so profound it felt like a tangible blessing inside my shop. Normal life continued, but the heavy, suffocating anxiety I had carried for 34 years completely vanished. My family tried to pay their bills with stories. I heard through indirect channels that they were busy telling everyone I was a cold, calculated monster who had abandoned her own blood in a time of crisis. Let them talk. Empty stories don't stop a foreclosure, and performative tears don't pay a legal judgment. They had spent their entire lives chasing the appearance of value, and in the end, they were left with nothing but the empty echo of their own vanity. My true future walked through the door on a crisp, clear afternoon in late May. Her name was Jasmine. She was 22 years old, wearing a faded jacket that was far too thin for the San Francisco chill, and clutching a heavy backpack held together by silver duct tape. She was a brilliant student who had been forced to drop out of her university physics program because she couldn't afford the mounting fees. As I was cataloging a recent acquisition, I watched her wander over to a display case containing a completely disassembled 19th century maritime clock. She didn't just look at the pieces, she studied them with an innate mathematical comprehension. "The tooth geometry on the center wheel is calculated incorrectly for sea level thermal expansion," she murmured softly to herself. I looked up from my desk. She jumped, her eyes widening in sudden panic. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking down. "I didn't mean to be intrusive. It's just that specific gear system was designed for a weight-driven pendulum, not a marine balance spring. If you assemble it using the current alignment, the watch will gain 4 minutes every 24 hours. I carefully set down my pen, walked over to the glass case, and handed her a pair of white cotton gloves. "Show me," I said. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her eyes were entirely steady as she explained the micromechanical friction. She was exactly right. She possessed the rare, invisible eye. I hired her on the spot, not as a standard assistant, but as my primary apprentice. Over the months, I didn't just pay her a living wage, I mentored her, quietly liquidating her entire student loan debt through a private foundation she doesn't even know I control. I wasn't buying her affection. I was investing in her raw, authentic potential, planting a seed of excellence that would outlast my own life. My workshop became a sanctuary where value was recognized through substance, not assigned by social metrics. This structural reversal brings us to a deep philosophical rule that I have come to understand perfectly, a concept I call the illusion of power in an empty wallet. There is a fundamental division in human psychology between two distinct states of existence, the dimension of having and the dimension of being. My sister, Madison, and my parents spent their entire adult lives operating strictly within the realm of having. They had to have the luxury cars, the elite neighborhood address, the public relations titles, and the expensive art gallery showcases to convince themselves that they actually mattered. But beneath the layers of borrowed prestige, their internal world was a complete vacuum. They possessed no real skills, no internal resilience, and no authentic value. The moment their artificial stream of debt-funded capital was cut off, their entire reality evaporated into nothingness because they did not know how to simply be. I chose to live my life entirely in the dimension of being. I became a master horologist, a precise mechanical restorer, a self-contained economic force. My true worth was never tied up in the $27 million sitting inside my wealth portfolio. The money is merely a practical tool, a heavy financial firewall against the superficial noise of society, a master key to protect my absolute autonomy. My worth was forged in the quiet, stubborn refusal to let an arrogant family define my internal value. My worth was in my capacity to see the gold in the discarded dust. I've come to realize that the people who are supposed to see your value are often the ones most structurally blind to it. If you find yourself in a similar situation right now, building your dreams in absolute silence, while superficial people look down on your struggle, remember that you do not need their validation to be luminous. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from their chaos. Let them miscalculate your worth until you are entirely out of their reach. Your time is ticking, and you are exactly where you belong. If this journey of reclaiming your own narrative resonated with your life, please hit the share button right now. Drop a yes in the comments if you have finally learned to stop letting toxic people define your internal worth. Let's remind the world that true gold operates in absolute silence. Thank you for being part of our community. The quiet ones are always the ones to watch.